But yeah, I'm fascinated to see how that one ends.
For sure. Same here. Same here. All right, moving on to our next topic at hand. And let me get the video up actually. Where is it? Topic 4. All right, so this was posted on, where is this? This is at resetera.com. Okay. Uh, New boss at Microsoft Studios on Xbox first party strategy. This was posted on a forum that took a quote that I think would be interesting to talk about because of E3 around the corner. Quote, there always will be a single player games and maybe 20 to 30 hours of gameplay. We love those kinds of games, and there's place for those. But it's also certainly the case with the focus on watching, streaming, broadcasts, and esports. That is, it's really important to to think about the longevity of a game. Unquote. Booty explains. It's really difficult for anybody to. It's really difficult for anybody to think about making a large-scale AAA game these days without having a mined content and service plan that goes 1 to 2 years into the future out of the gate. Games really have become much more social, much more mainstream, much more widespread. We know the game industry is growing and is taking nothing away from what you call a single player narrative cinematic game. But we see a lot of interest from our players in more community driven ongoing franchises. I think there is an alignment of a lot of trends we see in gaming overall. With games being large as they are, with the move to games as an ongoing service, it is difficult to pivot quickly and try to chase after trends that might happen even on the scale of a year. In business terms, a year can be a long time, but development time can be 3 to 4 years these days. That's a span we need to think about. We got our strategic long-term bets, our development cycles, and things our players like to do in sync, and that will set us for success. Also, I just forgot the link of the article is actually from. Oh, it was an interview. Okay, cool. I'll link down the chat. Cool, awesome. So, with that being,
I agree with Scooch said in the chat, by the way.
what did he say? I was reading the thing.
Digging the Gears 4 trailer on loot.
Oh yeah, yeah, because of
Yeah,
Microsoft. Hey.
that's yeah. Well, anyway. Uh, yeah.
It really is hard. It really is hard for AAA developers to make games that you can't think without making a game and having a what was it having a service behind it to extend the longevity of a game, especially cinematic single player games as well, whether it be DLC, whether it be costumes or whatnot. um,
Yeah.
it's a very difficult thing, and it's, man, because
This is why people argue that the landscape of AAA games is dying, because a lot of people see AAA games as a thing that will be becoming obsolete simply because there are more and more indie games that look just as good as these AAA games. I would argue against that. Um, and um, when again, like I said in the pre-show, when these games come out, they cost a lot of money, regardless of time, regardless of how much the studio is um they cost too much. That's what I'm trying. Long and short of it, they cost too
yes,
much.
yes,
And
exactly.
we've talked about ways that people have suggested that these AAA studios, kind of cut costs, and that's like, make the workforce smaller and extend the time in which it gets made. That does cut costs, but not enough. Especially if you want a game, like a big problem that I've heard from a lot of developers, is that if you want your AAA game to be up to snuff with today's graphics, with today's standards, you have to build the game fast. You have to keep it
Hmm.
in more of a modern setting. If you start to build a game 4 years before it's released, your game's gonna look 4 years old. Like, just straight up, it's gonna look older than other things that are being put out faster. So you're in a very competitive space. And so I get why these big studios, these big publishers are going, well, multiplayer games is where it's at. Like it's a lower development time. It sells more copies because people care about that more. I get why they see that, and why the landscape of single player games isn't something that AAA studios are really vying to look for. I don't think in any way, shape, or form that single player games are necessarily going anywhere, because arguably you could say that, the new God of War is an argument against that.
Yeah. Prime
It
example.
sold almost 5 million copies,
Mm-hmm.
which is insane for a single player game nowadays.
Yeah.
But I think that there's two factors into that. That game has been worked on for 6 fucking years.
Yeah, you could tell looking at that game that there is so much work that was into that game. It's insane.
From what I understand, I could be wrong about this, but it was like 3 years of writing and getting things right, and then like the other 3 years were building the game.
I would assume so. That sounds right.
Yeah. But like, I think that the other factor that Gears has, I'm sorry, Gears, Jesus Christ, I'm watching this.
Right.
That God of War has over other first-person games, especially new IPs, is that it's not as risky. PlayStation was easy to say yes to another God of War. Like, that's not that hard of a sell,
Right.
Right. I imagine that there was some tug and pull, because it's not like this other games in the past. But when you look at a studio, like if I went to Microsoft tomorrow and I said, hey, I have this new game where you play as a guy named Steve, and he's on an island, and the entire time that he's on the island, he's shooting bad guys, but then he learns that the bad guys actually have like the Ark of the Covenant, they're going to be like, what's the game called? And I go, Steve's Happy Fun Time Adventure Island. And they're going to be like, no, that's a new IP. We don't know what it can do. You don't have history. So no.
Yeah. The other thing to kind of point out is that Sony has a much big, they have, at this time, they have a much easier time saying yes to more single player games, to more games that are more experimental, because they can afford that right now. They're, in terms of the console wars, they're in the lead, and they're ones that are in a perfectly fine position. Microsoft's in the kind of the single play spot right now, and they have to take their approach a different way to earn what money they can. So it's kind of hard for them to say, like, yeah, we will bring on single player games for our console and for our company. Like, bring them on and we'll showcase them. It's very hard for them to say that now, because now what they're trying to struggle with, or what they're trying to figure out, is what exactly can they provide for the people who bought an Xbox One or an Xbox One X, since their first party lineup is not the beefiest versus Sony's, and it is very hard for them to say, for a lot of AAA game studios. It's like, we would love to bring this on, but it's very risky. We need something that's safe and something that we know will be a hit. So it's definitely, I understand what they're saying, and I definitely understand why it's very hard right now for AAA developers to make games for any publisher or for any console to be successful in, because it's very hard. And we said in the pre-show, the amount of money that is put into the AAA games is almost equivalent as a movie. It is ridiculous the amount of money that is put into these games, to then hopefully get back that amount of money to be in the green, to be able to make that money back to then pursue a possible sequel. So I understand it. I agree, and I understand it. It's very hard. As far as like what strategy is there to combat that, like that is something that I can only guess, and as far as like what they could do, but obviously everybody knows Microsoft's one true weakness at the moment is the fact that they don't have enough first-party games that they can tout on their system versus with Sony.
They do. They're just not doing anything with them, because
that's true. True. Yeah,
like,
you're right.
That's a major issue. And I think another issue personally that, like, let's say the Wii U had versus like the Wii or the Switch, is that their first party titles are not, they weren't coming out on the Wii U. And I don't think like people really gave a shit about that system, because there wasn't anything that grabbed them. and that's I think a big problem with Microsoft right now too. Um, I guarantee you, at like we're gonna talk about it in the next thing, but like Halo 6 will be shown,
Oh yeah.
Gears of War 5 will be
Yep.
shown.
Yep. Agreed. Agreed.
Like they've been in development for so long, they have to at this point. Um, I don't agree with you, Scooge, that Microsoft will not make it to the next console generation. They absolutely will.
They will.
Even though
They will.
they're selling half of what what Sony's selling, they're still making enough and selling enough in terms of video game sales and console sales to fund the next generation. Plus, they don't want to separate, like their big thing right now is they don't want to separate PC players from console players. So that's a huge factor for them as well. And that's why their big thing right now is that, like, if you buy a game on your Xbox, you can play it on your PC. Like, they want to make that connectivity thing a huge deal. And that's going to be a huge selling point at their conference too.
Agreed.
But I do understand. Like I said, I do understand where they're coming from. Just on the aspect that even on Sony's end. Oh, by the way, Scooge, that comment you said about Hideo Kojima being on Sony's side is not true, because the next game is not a PlayStation exclusive.
They gave him the money to make it, or it helped him to make whatever he wants, but it's a multi-platform, I believe. So
yeah, I've heard nothing but it being multi-platform. Mm-hmm. Anyway, like I said, I get the danger and the scare of today's market selling a single-player game that is a new IP. It's super dangerous and super scary in today's gaming atmosphere. So
agreed. All right, moving on to our next topic at hand, and this is